Today's video is brought to you by Dollar Shave Club. And just to put it out there, I've been a member of Dollar Shave Club for a few years now, so I highly recommend their products. For those of you that haven't used Dollar Shave Club, there's a few different starter packs you should check out. I'll have a link that you can follow in the description as well as a pinned comment, or you can just go to dollarshaveclub.com. From there, it's really easy to get to all the different selections. You can custom make your own packs for the month, or you can even select from their shave and face, shave and shower, shave, shower, hydrating, and teeth, all depending on your needs and all at extremely competitive prices. Seriously, I save a lot of money. And did I say they offer butt wipes? Yeah, you heard me right. Butt wipes. For your butt. To wipe it. And they leave you all fresh and clean. The shave butter's also really awesome. Makes your face silky smooth. And there's like no friction when you're shaving. But don't fool yourself thinking they only cover shaving. They now offer a wide array of bathroom hygienic needs. So head on over to their website, dollarshaveclub.com, or follow the link in the description or pinned comment to check out what might be best for you. And once again, I really do highly recommend it from a personal standpoint. This isn't just a sellout. I've literally had them for years. They even have toothpaste and all that stuff now. So if you are debating on anything for your bathroom hygienic needs, make sure you check them out because you don't have to go deal with people in public. Prices are amazing, like seriously amazing. And you can pretty much be naked making your order, and it comes straight to your door. So you really can't beat that. Once again, check out the link in the description or in the pinned comment, or go to dollarshaveclub.com and get your monthly subscription, whether you set up your own or choose from one of their available packages already ready. And without any further ado, let's begin. I was a young man living in the north of England, Yorkshire. I just started dating a girl from Leeds, a good few miles away from me. I was pretty engrossed with this girl. She was my first. So subsequently, I missed the last bus home and had to walk. Her family was dead against me spending the night. So off I set. It was around 11 p.m. and I lived about 7 miles away, so I had at least an hour's walk home. I started thumbing a lift. There wasn't much traffic, but I lived in hope. I'd been walking for about 20 minutes when I heard a car in the distance behind me. I stuck out my thumb and prayed. The car stopped and the front passenger door popped open. I should explain I had fairly long hair back then and wore it in a ponytail. So I climbed into this car and the driver stares at me for a good 10 seconds. His first sentence was, "I thought you were a girl." Which wasn't quite as wired as it sounds, but he did seem to be a bit peeved a spotty teenage lad got in his car instead of a girl. He asked where I was off to, so I told him it was just the next village. It was on his way, and it wasn't a problem. Quick 10-minute car journey. Anyway, he started chatting about mundane stuff. Football mainly. Then he asked if I had a girlfriend and if I had fucked her tonight. With that, he tried to grab my hand, laughing and asking to sniff my fingers. I was getting really freaked out at this. I was quite a naive young lad back then. He then proceeded to tell me about his last girlfriend and how he'd raped her because she wouldn't give him sex. I'll tell you, all I wanted to do was get the fuck out of the car. My village was fast approaching, and at my road end I asked him to stop and drop me off, which thankfully is what he did. As I got out, he said, "You're a lucky lad. There's a lot of nasty bastards out there who'd have robbed you and taken you for a ride." I mumbled my thanks and legged it home like the devil was chasing me. I was so bloody scared. 3 weeks later on the national news, I saw the bloke who gave me a lift. He was charged with the rape and murder of several young women around my area. His name was Peter Sutcliffe. He's still in prison, and he was the reason I stopped hitchhiking. First off, I would like to say thank you to all of the Patron family from the Discord for being supportive and cool during a rather hard time for me and Zeus. Anyway, let me get to the meat and potatoes of why you guys are even listening. This is a story from a law enforcement officer that is just to get it out there and show you guys the worst case scenario of what can go wrong for us. The date is February 6th, 2019. I had been moved over to nights again, and me and my partner Zeus were happy to be back in our old stomping grounds per se. We had been on shift for 3 hours and 24 minutes. I was sitting in the parking lot of a local abandoned restaurant running radar. Zeus, my 4-year-old Belgian Malinois, had his head right next to mine. It was cold outside, 24 degrees Fahrenheit to be exact. He was panting, his tongue hanging from his jaw. I laugh to myself and reach up, scratching behind his ear. He responds by licking me on the side of my face. "That's a good boy," I say as I pat him on his head. Just then, my radar beeps to life. The speed limit on the road I'm watching is 40. The radar just clocked the silver Chevy Malibu going well over 60. "We got one, boy," I say to my partner as I hit my lights and sirens. Zeus is now dancing excitedly, yipping and going back and forth in his back seat. I key up on the microphone and tell dispatch where I am and all the pertinent information to the traffic stop. The silver Malibu that I'm behind pulled over to the shoulder of the road, and I radioed dispatch again and let them know the exact location. I pat my dog and zip up my jacket. I open the door and point my spotlight at the car and watch the car for a moment. Just one person in the car. I make the mistake of thinking to myself, just a routine traffic stop. I shiver and take a few steps to the car. A knot is forming in my gut. Something is wrong, but I ignore it. I step up to the driver's side of the car, hanging just away from the door and leaning into view. "Hello, my name is Officer Ellis. Do you know the reason you're being stopped today?" I asked as I smiled. The man driving looks up at me. A Hispanic male approximately 40 years of age spoke with a thick accent. "No." He was short and curt. "Well, sir, I have you going 62 and a 40 back there. Do you have a license and proof of financial responsibility?" The gentleman hands me his driver's license and his insurance card. I take the documents and tell him, "If you'll just sit tight and stay in your car, I'll be right back," and turn to go back to my car. I get back into my car and am greeted by my partner and his massive tongue. I laugh and push his head away. I key dispatch and ask for warrants and everything I need on the driver. I look up and see the door to the car open. I grab my bullhorn mic and say, "Sir, stay in the car." The man is now standing outside. I open my door and climb out of the car. "Sir," I say as I stepped around my door and walked towards him. Time froze. In the lights of my expedition, I see the reflection of something metal. "Sir, stop!" I yell as the man rushes me. He closed the distance before I could react at all. Then I was on the ground, sharp burning pain in my right side underneath my armpit. I let out a yell. It felt like someone had just jabbed a hot fire poker into my side. Then again as my other hand fumbles on my belt. "There!" I yelled self-internally as I mashed a button on my belt. A third burning pain as I hear my back door fly open. The barking of my dog ceases and I feel the man who was on top of me knocked off. I hear Zeus growling and the man yelling. Then I hear my dog yelp, and it was a yelp of pain. I find myself scrambling backward and drawing my sidearm. "Drop it!" I yell at the man. He is now advancing towards me, knife in hand. "I will shoot you! Drop it!" I yell again. The man begins to run and I squeeze the trigger. The slide on my Glock halts at the back position. I'm noticing it's getting hard to breathe. I key up. "Shots fired! I'm injured, suspect is down, send EMS." I reload my weapon and try to stand. I can't get up. For the 24-degree weather, my right side is warm. Zeus has not moved. I managed to get up using my car, and I kicked the blade away from this guy using my weak hand to keep my weapon trained on the crumpled body of the man. He is not breathing, and I can hear sirens approaching. I get over to my dog, who is still laying still. I fall next to my dog. "Well, we've done it now, boy," I say as I put his head in my lap. He is bleeding from the side. I'm petting him, and now I'm getting tunnel vision. I see the lights now. I look at my boy, who is looking up at me. "I'm gonna close my eyes for a second," I say. My voice is now in a whisper, and it's almost impossible to breathe now. I close my eyes. I come to in the ER. I got over 20 stitches, a chest tube, a week in the hospital, and time off work for being stabbed 3 times. My partner Zeus got over 10 stitches and was stabbed twice. I'm now waiting to hear if I will have charges pressed against me for killing the man who tried to kill me. I never know how to end these, but I just feel better getting this off my chest. Thank you for y'all's time and patience. On October 15th, 2018, I was on patrol. The normal thing that I do on a nightly basis. I drove through the streets of my town, the name of which I will keep to myself for privacy reasons. My beat, as it is called, is what we call the East Side. This is the poor side of town, where one would assume the worst of the worst live. In our town, this is sadly true. I actually requested to be on this beat. I had been told ever since I was in the police academy I had a nose for narcotics, and over the years this proved to be true. Over my relatively short career, so far I've gotten quite a few narcotic busts under my belt. In particular, I have a nose for methamphetamine, and on this beat the drug of choice is meth. I digress. Back to the story. I'm on my beat and it's a normal night. Well, as normal as it can be for law enforcement. There is no such thing as normal in this field. I'm in my cruiser, a 2017 Ford Expedition. It's just shortly after dark. Maybe 5 minutes as I turn onto one of the main streets that runs through the town, the radio squawks to life, breaking the silence of my vehicle. I drive in utter silence with my windows down because I can hear quite a bit. Everything from conversations outside to music that is on the other side of the block. The radio squawks again. Dispatch is calling a unit to respond to a domestic disturbance. Not my beat. I make a mental note of the address that was given in case a shots fire call was sent out. I tap on the keyboard on my in-car computer. I'm at a stoplight. I look up to see a car bolt through the intersection. I grumble and hit my lights and pick up the microphone and key up. 143 to dispatch, I'm going to be 1033. Blue vehicle moving at a high rate of speed. The dispatcher replied, 10-4, 143. I pushed the gas pedal to the floor and jerked the wheel to the left. My car lurched forward and I hit my sirens. Dispatch, be advised I'm turning left onto MLK. Speed is now 60, blue car, Chevy Malibu. License plate is Henry Ida Charles 6987. Can you run a 27 and 29? I look at the car as it pulls over. I angle my car to the left of the back of the vehicle to provide myself some cover and hit my spotlight. I shine my light into the car and wait to get out of my vehicle. Dispatch, be advised we are on the corner of MLK and 5th Street. 3 occupants in the car. I set my microphone down and grabbed my baseball cap. I put my cap on and I open my door. I stand by my car door for a moment watching the people in the car fidget. Dispatch returns. 143, be advised 27 and 29 come back clean. I mutter to myself and shiver. A cold front came in last night and it's too cold to be doing this. I think these thoughts to myself as I walk around the front of the car and approach the driver's side. I walk up to the car, blading my body away from the car, not going up to the window, hanging back to the rear of the car. I lean in view of the window and speak. "Evening, guys. My name is Officer Ellis. Do you know why you're being pulled over tonight?" I ask. The reply I got was something to the effect of, "Nah, man." "All right, well, I saw you blow through a light at a pretty fast speed. I clocked you at 75 and a 30. Do you have ID for everyone in the car and valid insurance?" As I take down the VIN number of the car. The 3 occupants all handed over identification and a valid insurance card. I take the papers and turn to go back to my vehicle. I key up. "Dispatch, can I get a 28 on James Carter, black male, date of birth 11 April 2001? Drew Winston, black male, date of birth 12 January 1999, and Marcos Mendoza, Latino male, date of birth 2 February 2002. I made up all those names, by the way. I then run the VIN number through my in-car computer. I then begin to write in my notepad the names and dates of birth of all 3 men. I glance up through the window and see them really moving around. The alert on my computer breaks my attention. The car alerts as stolen. I grumble. Dispatch keys up. 143, be advised. Marcos Mendoza has a warrant out of Oceana County for failure to appear. All clear on the other 2. I double-check the VIN to what I have written down and key up to dispatch. Dispatch, be advised the car is coming back 1099, please confirm. I now wait, getting anxious. 10-4-143, vehicle returns as 1099. I am now giddy as a schoolgirl on prom night. Finally, some action. 10-4, dispatch. Go ahead and roll another unit to my location. I then step out of my patrol car. I begin to walk up to the vehicle with my hand on my weapon. Just then I see the driver's side door of the car open and I shout, "Stay in the car!" I begin to draw my weapon and time slows to a crawl. My brain registers the gun in the driver's hand. I can't get mine up fast enough. I hear the pop. Then it feels like the air is knocked out of me, knocking me on my back. 3 more pops and I can feel them punching into me. I get my gun out with my right hand and key up on my shoulder mic. Shots fired, I'm hit." My voice is strangely calm as I raise my Glock 19 and squeeze. The rounds I fire hit the back of the car, now speeding away. Dispatch, be advised, shots fired, suspect is fleeing. Roll EMS and more units to my location, I'm hit. I say again, I'm hit. Just then another cruiser goes flying by, sirens and lights blaring. I manage to get myself up to sitting on the side of my car by the tire. I can't breathe and I'm pulling at my shirt. It's wet and I'm thinking that I just took rounds to the chest. Another car screeches to a stop and the officer jumps out and runs up to me. "Where are you hit?" he says as he sets his first aid kit down and radios to dispatch asking where EMS is. "The chest, I think," I manage to croak. Now the pain is coming. It's beginning to hurt and I can feel a warm wetness on my chest. "I think it hit your vest," I hear as I can feel my shirt being torn open. Breathing is rather difficult. "EMS," I managed to get out and cough a bit. That hurt, and it was not a thing I wanted to do. The sound of the sirens gets closer. I know it's EMS. The other officer is saying something to me, but I can't keep focused. He now has my vest off and he is pressing on my chest. That hurt. "Ow, that fucking hurts," I nearly yell at him. "Look, man, I think you got them all in your vest, but you're bleeding. I'm stopping it." He barks at me as EMS rolls up. That night I took 3 9mm rounds to the chest, resulting in a total of 4 fractured ribs, severe bruising, and a few scrapes and bumps. Please, if you are in a stolen car, do not shoot at the cops. The 3 individuals who were all in the vehicle were apprehended and are currently awaiting trials on multiple felony charges, and are looking at a long time behind bars. All because the driver shot at me. The driver is the one who would have been charged with the stolen car. The other 2 would have left with nothing. There were drugs in the vehicle as well. Methamphetamine. I can only think that they shot at me because they were scared I was going to find the meth. Which I would have. I was watching a show on the lesser-known serial killers, and they talked about one that was killing girls in the New England area in 1981. The common denominator among these girls was that they were all known to hitchhike. Then they showed a picture of the serial killer, and my mouth about dropped. In 1981, I used to hitchhike between Massachusetts and New Hampshire, and during one of my adventures I was picked up by a man, and for some reason I instantly became very creeped out. He didn't look all that different from any other person. He didn't smell, wasn't wearing ripped or torn clothing, and though a little furry in the face, he looked average. Still, something told, actually yelled at me to get out of the car as he began to slow down for an intersection. I could see out of the corner of my eye his hand moving towards me, and it was at the same moment he almost stopped for the intersection that I jumped out of the car. He stopped for a split second, then took off, and I took off in the other direction on foot. I never gave that incident a second thought until I saw that show. My God, I was in the car with a serial killer, and I was one of his victims in his mind. I had a technique that I used when hitchhiking, and it may well have saved me from a nasty end. I was hitching along the Welsh border one afternoon back in the early 80s. A dirty, battered van pulled up, kind of the thing farmers drove around in, possibly with spare sheep in the back. The driver leaned over and opened the passenger door and told me to hop in. He was grinning, and it was not a pretty sight. He was an ugly you-know-what. This is where the technique comes in. Whenever someone stopped to pick me up, I did 2 things with 1 piece of preparation beforehand. First thing was, if the door was open, or in case it was, to step into a position where I would be on the wrong side of it to be pulled in, the door between me and the driver. I always knew my route very well. I'd study the map as if I were going to drive it myself, so I was prepared for this. I would ask the driver where he was going. Even if he asked me first, I'd just answer with the question and make him declare first. That gave me the chance to say no thanks, I'm going somewhere else, which would involve a fairly major detour to wherever he said. As he leaned across the passenger seat grinning, he kind of looked down and I saw what was there. 5 or 6 pretty nasty looking porn magazines open on the passenger seat. I can't remember where he said he was going, but clearly I wasn't going there. I pretended not to see the magazines and just said thanks and started off down the road. Fortunately, he pulled away a bit sharpish. It was a very quiet place. I'd scarcely seen another car, but at that moment a brightly painted van sporting a sign for a hippie sort of clown act, festival entertainer, that sort of thing, came around the corner. I hadn't put my thumb out yet, but the guy immediately pulled over and asked me if I was okay. Who was that guy? I don't really know what prompted him to do it. It seemed to be an instinct. But he was plainly trustworthy and asked me if he could take me where I needed to go. He was worried and insisted. He was lovely and took me back to the place where I was staying, lecturing me most of the way about hitchhiking on my own. The village was Mcculloch, a name many Brits will recognize from some of the ugliest news reports we have ever read. The man in the van was, without a doubt, Fred West. I'm very lucky. So this happened to me about 6 months ago now. I'm originally from a town in the north of the UK, but I was living in a different part of the country at the time for university. I was just going into my second season, so I had moved from my student accommodations, like halls, to a house share with 4 other girls. We were in a pretty nice house on a small dead-end street, and all the shops and bars were at the end of our street. I was in a bedroom that was on the bottom floor and at the front of the house. It had originally been a living room, but had been changed into a bedroom for student housing. Because it used to be a living room, the window was a huge bay window that took up the entire length of the front wall. The house had a big driveway and a front garden, both with fences around. This meant that you couldn't walk to the front of the house without intending to be there. You would have to walk up the driveway. I had been living in the house for about 2 weeks when this happened. On this particular night, there were only 2 of us, as our other 3 roommates had gone home for the weekend. The other girl that was in had a second-floor bedroom, also on the front of the house. It was around 2 a.m. and I sat in my bed watching Netflix. I didn't usually stay up this late, but I was talking to a new boy at the time, and I would often stay up late just to talk to him. Sad, I know, but new relationships are exciting. I remember wanting to go to sleep at about 12:30 and deciding to stay up for a bit longer to talk to him. And I'm so glad I did. At this time I was quite naive and didn't really think much about the dangers of not locking the doors and leaving the windows open. I grew up in a very nice area where we didn't really have to lock our doors, so I was still in this mindset. This experience definitely changed that. Because of this, I had one of my windows slightly open and my curtains were open. The curtains didn't matter too much because of the way the house was built. The garden and trees were right in front of my window, meaning no one could see in unless they stood directly in front of it. Being naive, I didn't think there was a possibility that anyone would try to. I was half laying down, half sitting up in bed with my laptop in front of me. I didn't have my laptop volume up much, as although she was upstairs, there was another girl in the house and I wanted to be respectful. All of a sudden I saw a shadow go past my window, like a person walking past. I froze immediately, as like I mentioned earlier, there was no way someone could walk past unless they walked down my driveway and were specifically coming to my house. I thought maybe someone had walked down the wrong driveway or was possibly cutting through and was going to jump the fence to another house. Something didn't sit right about this at all, however, so I left my laptop running and just looked at the window for a second. I couldn't see out of the window at all since it was so dark outside, but I could make out shadows on the wall just next to it. For a second there was nothing there. Then a shadow of a man went past. Then the shadow of another man about 2 seconds afterwards. At this point I knew something was wrong and I shut my laptop immediately, in the hope that if they looked in the window they wouldn't see me. A bit of time went past, maybe like a minute or 2, and I just sat in the pitch black waiting to see if I saw anything else. After this bit of time went by, another shadow of a man went past my window in the opposite direction, as if they both walked in front of my window and to the back of the house, but only one came back. I was certain at this point that they were doing something wrong, but for some reason I could not move. My brain was trying to process a million things at once, and I was so scared that I froze. I felt like that if I moved they would have known I was there, and I had no idea whether this was a good thing or a bad thing. For all I knew, they could have been hoping for a young 19-year-old girl to be inside, and I didn't want to run the risk of letting them know I was in there. I was also completely naked under my covers, and it definitely crossed my mind that if I got up and they could see me in the window, they would see me naked. After what felt like an eternity of just waiting, I heard a loud bang on my window. It sounded like someone had hit something like a rock off the window with force. I assumed they were trying to break the window and panicked hugely, but still couldn't move. I can't explain what was going through my mind, but it was almost like I was waiting for a completely definitive thing to happen before I got up, as if I was being overdramatic or something. After the loud noise, I would say maybe 30 seconds went past, and then all of a sudden my curtains started moving and I see a hand come around the side to get them out of the way. They were big curtains and many openable windows were on either side of the big window, meaning they were slightly blocked even by the open curtains. I then look over to the curtains and see a figure of a man climbing through my window. He was halfway through my window with the top half of his body inside of my room. This is where my mind finally decided that this was a fight or flight situation, and I shot up and ran towards the other side of the room. It was locked, so I had to fumble for the key, turn it, and then open the door and run, all while making a huge amount of noise. I ran up the stairs and knocked on my roommate's room. Still completely naked, I should add, so the image she got when she opened the door is still quite amusing to think about. She opened the door almost immediately, which I found odd for it being 2 a.m., but I was thankful none the least. I told her what had happened and we locked her door and started panicking. Neither of us knew what to do, as we had never been in a situation like this before. Being stupid and young, I decided to ring my mom. Completely not helpful to the situation, but I wasn't thinking straight, and she told me to ring the police immediately, obviously. So we rang the police, and because we didn't know if the men were in the house or not, they arrived within 2 minutes, as it may be an active burglary. I had left my laptop and all my possessions in my room, other than my phone because it happened to be in my hand when I ran. So if they were in my room, they had plenty to take. The police arrived and we threw down some keys from the top window to them so they could let themselves in. They searched the whole property, top to bottom, and found no one. I went down when they assured us it was safe and checked my room, and nothing had been taken. I knew for sure that they mustn't have come into my room, as my laptop was clear as day on my bed and would have been the first thing they would have seen if they had. The police agreed that I must have scared them off by getting up, as they mustn't have been expecting anyone to be in. They must have thought the room was a living room, as it made sense to be, and had been expecting to rob the house while everyone was asleep upstairs. I had this crazy thought process through all of this, where I started wondering if I had seen what I thought I had, and started doubting myself and wondering if I was just insane. But when I went down to check my room, my window had been completely open to the fullest extent. I had opened it only a crack at most, and this just confirmed that what I had seen was completely real. I learned a valuable lesson about leaving windows open that day for sure. While the police were there, they actually got radioed about an attempted robbery just a couple of streets along from mine, and they suspected it was the same 2 men. Nothing ever came back about that though, so they mustn't have caught them. Unfortunately. They told us that if they did catch anybody engaging in a similar crime, they would get back in touch. But to this day, they haven't. So either they've been caught and not connected to my case, or they haven't been caught at all. CSI came the next day and actually managed to get a fingerprint from my window, but they said the person must have been sweating or something, as the fingerprint was too smudged to get anything from it. I am so glad I decided to stay up late, as if I hadn't been awake for this, they would have physically been in my room by the time I noticed they were there, or they noticed me. The thought of waking up to 2 men in my room is terrifying, and I'm not sure what they would have done if they had gotten into my room before realizing, as there was then no easy escape for them. They would have had to climb out the tiny window again or unlock my bedroom door and then the front door to get out. This might have led to a violent and nasty situation if they had realized they were stuck in a room with an eyewitness, and it doesn't bear thinking about. Also, my roommate told me after the police left that she actually woke up for some reason about 5 minutes before I came flying up the stairs, and she said she heard the loud bang on my window when she was already awake. She had started to get a bad feeling about that and had waited up a bit sitting at the edge of her bed next to her door just in case I came running up. It's very interesting that she woke up during this, as the men were not loud at any point other than when they hit the window. Maybe it says a lot about the body's ability to detect danger. I, unfortunately, ended up not being able to sleep in that room after that without having all the lights on, and soon after decided to move back home for university because I felt so uneasy about living down there. This next story is a story from 7 months ago. I just got permission to narrate it, so I'm going to narrate it for you. So when I say this past New Year's Eve, they mean last New Year's Eve, not this one we just had, but the one before. This past New Year's Eve, I went away for the night with my 2 best friends and one of their moms. I'm posting now because I recently discovered this subreddit. I was home for the holidays for college, and my friend Sarah invited me to go to Palm Springs to celebrate New Year's with her mom and our friend Rachel. I didn't have any other plans, so I decided to go with them. We went to a cool city about an hour from where we live that is big on shopping and resorts. We planned on having a pretty calm night. Watch the ball drop at a block party thing downtown, have a few drinks at a bar. Since we're on the West Coast, the ball drops at 9. So at around 8, we ventured from our hotel, walking to the block party about a mile away. On the way, we passed by a very lively bar. We decided to stop by and spent 15 minutes dancing, but didn't get any drinks. It was a gay bar, and Sarah and Rachel, being gay, they were stoked on it and wanted to come back after the ball drop, even though it was about 90% men there. We continue on to the block party, get some dinner and a glass of champagne. The ball dropped and they had a DJ, so we spent about an hour there dancing. After we got tired of it, we decided to head back to the bar and hang out there until midnight. Once we get there, Sarah's mom pays for a drink for each of us, but leaves soon after saying that she was tired. It's about 10:30 at this point, and Sarah, Rachel, and I are enjoying our drinks and having fun dancing. Rachel tried some of my drinks since it was one she hadn't had before. I constantly have my guard up when drinking in public, and I felt safe at this bar because it was 90% gay men, who I thought wouldn't have any interest in me. I went back to the bar to get a second drink, and that's the last thing I remember. The rest I gathered from Sarah and Rachel. Almost immediately after getting my second drink, I asked Rachel to go to the bathroom with me because I wasn't feeling well, even though I was completely fine 10 minutes before. Once in the bathroom, I just collapsed on the floor, and I was almost unresponsive. Rachel was now worried, somehow drags my half-lifeless body out to where Sarah was waiting for us. Security, seeing my condition and assuming I was wasted, asked us to leave. Sarah and Rachel decided to take me back to the hotel about half a mile away. By this point, I was unconscious and there was barely sounds escaping my mouth. They saw someone leave the bar at the same time as us, who was walking near us, but they were preoccupied trying to keep my lifeless body off the ground. At one point, I threw up all over myself, the both of them, and the sidewalk, etc. The next part of the story I had to get from Sarah, and Rachel doesn't have memory of this. Still struggling to carry me, the man they saw leave the bar approached them. He was hitting on Rachel, trying to get her to go grab a drink with him. She was very agitated and told him to leave. Her friend needed her help right now. He didn't take no for an answer and continued to follow us down the street, asking if they wanted to get drinks with him, if he can help carry me and such. A middle-aged woman witnessing this comes up and tells the man off. Something along the lines of, "Stop harassing these young women or I'm going to call the police." He left after that. Next, by some miracle, an EMT and his wife enjoying the holiday ran into us on the street. He checked me out to make sure something wasn't majorly wrong and then carried me the rest of the way to the hotel and into my room, since my friends could barely hold me up. They thanked him profusely and him and his wife left. This is where Rachel's memory kicks back in. 5 minutes later, they get a knock on the door, and it's the EMT and his wife again. They came to let us know that a man had followed us to the hotel, and they just saw him hop the gate and start to make his way to our room. My friends called hotel security, but they were unable to find him. My friends didn't get a glimpse of him, but I'm sure it was the same man from earlier. I spent the rest of the night vomiting everything in my body and dry heaving after that. I woke up the next morning in a pile of pillows and blankets on the bathroom floor. My last memory at the bar was getting a second drink, and my friends filled me in on everything else that happened. Feeling like crap, I thought I must have drank way too much, but I had never blacked out in my life, and the amount of drinks I had, 2 in 2 hours since I didn't get to my second drink at the bar, didn't add up to me being completely unconscious. We decided my first drink had to have been drugged, since Rachel had some of it and she had no memory of our walk home, even though she was fully functional. I'm sure that the man Rachel was talking to and then followed us back was the one that slipped something into my drink. To this day, I don't really know how I could have been slipped something. I got my drink from the bar and never set it down. My best guess is that it was already in the cup. Thankfully, I had good friends and kind strangers to protect me that night. It keeps me up at night thinking of what could have happened under different circumstances. My brother and I had a babysitter named Daryl Keith Rich. It was 1975. I was 6 years old at the time, with my brother not far behind me, when Rich started to babysit for us. 3 short years later, Rich would go on a summer-long murder spree which would shake the foundation of our small community to its core. But I'm getting ahead of myself here. It was actually the neighbor girl who was hired to sit for us, but he always accompanied her when she would watch us. Always. Co-sitters. Daryl Rich was her boyfriend, but he was clearly the one in charge. He bosses us around and made fun of us. He enjoyed making us cry. He made me watch the Creature Features horror show on TV late at night and laughed when I cried during the gruesome, frightening, bloody parts. He'd tweak my skull with his fingers and call me a crybaby. Well, duh, I was a baby. He was very cruel. I think either the folks didn't like him, our sleepless nights, nightmare-riddled nights were telling, or the neighbor girl got tired of his company and broke it off with him. For whatever reason, we didn't have to put up with it for too long. His visits came to an end, and we were glad of it. Good riddance. He grew up, and so did we. Years later, I read about the 3 women he raped and killed, and I watched horror-stricken as the news reports came in of the little girl he threw off a 10-story bridge. She lived a little while in agony at the bottom of that lonely ravine. She was around my age at the time of her death. Disturbing. It was front-page news in our small town. It made me dry heave to see his photo splashed up on the screen in living color like that. That's my babysitter. It was a strange coincidence that one of his victims happened to be my father's high school sweetheart, his first bride, whom he'd wed fresh out of high school. That marriage didn't last, though. They divorced shortly thereafter. I only met her a few brief times, I didn't know her well, but I was sorry for her. Oh, so sorry. When Rich was finally caught and convicted for his heinous crimes, he was given the death penalty, which was carried out at the San Quentin prison March 15th, the year 2000. I'm not certain if those were his only victims, though. They were only the ones he confessed to. There may have been many others. There were a lot of unsolved homicides in that era in the North State. Last year I found some old recordings of us kids goofing around with the recorder telling stories. In one recording, my brother is very young, maybe 6. He tells a story of peering into a window at this old guy and suddenly feeling the rage build inside of him. He tells of breaking into the man's house and taking his life. Then, in his own words, the chilling words of a child can be heard saying, "I kinda liked his hat, so I kept it as a souvenir." I don't know if Daryl Keith Rich was confessing a crime to my brother when he told him that story, or if it was a fantasy. I do know that when I heard that recording, I had a cold chill run through my body and knew immediately I was hearing the voice beyond the grave, spoken through my brother. My little brother even had the accent and pauses of Rich down. He was imitating him. It made my skin crawl. Especially the part about the hat. I was a veterans service manager at the Anaheim, California Unemployment Office, specifically tasked with helping veterans get their benefits under then Governor Schwarzenegger's Operation Welcome Home program. The gentleman in question, Israel Izzy Orozco, visited my office 4 times. The first 2 times he came in with his elder father, who seemed very controlling and would barely let Izzy speak for himself. The third time he visited me, Izzy briefly asked about his benefits, but seemed uninterested in the money and the blasé about pursuing it further. He asked if we could speak privately, so we stepped into a room we had for such occasions and closed the door. He then opened up and started talking about how he had thoughts about violence and wanted to go back to the Marines because he felt purposeless in the normal world. I told him we had some folks he could talk to help him get readjusted, but he wasn't interested. He then launched into a talk about God and politics. Every time I tried to engage him, he would call my ideas bullshit and call me names. Wuss, pussy, etc. It was very clear he was looking for something, some kind of reaction he wasn't getting. He said he liked to solve things with my fists, rather than talking to pussies in suits, and we ended that session. He came to me one more time and we went through largely the same thing, except he seemed a bit more calm and didn't launch into any personal attacks. Just more generic talk about how the system wasn't set up to help anyone and how I wouldn't understand because I had a steady paycheck. I didn't disclose that my job had a 24-month temporary program. A few months later, I read on a local Orange County news website that Izzy had gone on a killing spree. He killed a childhood friend and his mother in Yorba Linda, not far from where I lived at the time. He also killed 4 homeless men pretty brutally. The 4th was stabbed in broad daylight outside of a fast food joint, a Carl's Jr., I think. He ended up dying in prison from unknown causes. What does it all mean? Who knows? I don't know if he was technically a serial killer since this didn't make national news. The Seattle Strangler was in my Army Aviation Unit in Fort Rucker in the 1980s. He was my instructor pilot. Nicest guy you would ever meet. Very knowledgeable about everything. Advised me on correct foods to eat, etc. Sweet guy. Helped everyone. He was a respected Senior Warrant Officer 3. A good friend of my best friend. We went hunting together on the weekends. We went to his house one time to pick something up. I think some wood for a wood project. He had 4 daughters, my friend and I could not help but notice there were porn videos all around the TV. I was shocked. His kids were home. I just thought it was super duper strange. I left the unit in 1990. Then in 2000 I read, Robert Yates, a former Air National Guard helicopter pilot and smelter worker, pleaded guilty in 2000 to murdering 13 women in Spokane, Walla Walla, and Skagit counties and was sentenced to 408 years in prison. He was later tried and convicted in Pierce County for the murders of 2 additional women in the late 1990s, for which he was sentenced to death. The state Supreme Court recently upheld his death sentence. When I was sent to Fort Drum for 2 weeks in 1992, I was a company commander evaluator for an Army exercise. Someone I knew there said that Bob Yates from Fort Rucker days was also there. He was under a tarp sleeping. It was 7 a.m. in the field in the winter. I woke him up and said, "Hey Bob, how are you doing?" He slowly got up and said, "Hello sir, how are you?" Usual stuff. He was always polite to superior officers. A quick note, a television show said that his grandmother killed his grandfather with an axe as he slept. Relevant? I don't know. He carried guns around us on every outing on weekends. Just goes to show you have to be vigilant and careful about the people you meet. I always liked him more than other Warrens who generally did not like young officers, like me. He wanted to help us learn. I just can't figure it out. 2 lives and 1 man. Every man is a mixture of good and evil. Most of us just never cross a line on our evil thoughts. The practice of morality and virtue is important to teach to our children. Something to think about. Today's video is brought to you by no one, I guess. I don't have a sponsor for this video. My patrons, my awesome patron supporters. I appreciate every single one of you. Thank you so much. And keep an eye out for our stream next weekend if you missed this last stream we did for Patron only. For those of you interested in joining Patron, make sure you check the link below. And for those of you that aren't, ignore the link below. And without any further ado, let's begin. This happened back in the fall of either 2002 or 2003, when I was around 12 or 13 years old, near Clinton Lake in Kansas on a Boy Scout campout. I still go backpacking and camping a lot, but this was the last camping trip I remember attending before moving states. We arrived at our campsite on a Friday and planned on staying through Saturday and leaving on Sunday morning. I remember us having to set up our tents in the rain Friday evening, but Saturday was sunny and gorgeous. I don't remember every precise detail, but right before we went out to hike that morning, an old van, perhaps a late 70s model, pulled into a campsite within view of ours. These guys were hippies with a capital H, and that was my first exposure to what weed smells like when some of us asked if a skunk was nearby. They were too far away from us to hear any specific conversations, but even the adults found this to be a funny sight. One of the leaders, I think, went over to ask them to stop using drugs in front of us or to move campsites. When we got back from our day hike, those hippies were still at the same campsite and so baked. They couldn't play their instruments with any skill. Here's where it got weird. By the time the sun was setting, the group of stoners had completely ditched their hippie attire and had dressed in total goth style. Some had makeup and made their faces unnaturally pale, and others had black trench coats on, and they must have had a stereo because all we could hear over there was grunge metal playing. That night after we cooked and ate dinner, all the scouts, including myself, headed out into an open area of campgrounds to play capture the flag. We collectively established the boundaries, which was still pretty close to the group of now goths, but it gave us a different angle of view on their site. I doubt they had any idea we were there, since we were playing with no flashlights. By this point, the grunge metal had been replaced by this creepy, ominous opera music. I succumbed to curiosity, but I wasn't about to sneak into their campsite. I just crept a little closer to see what they were doing. They had made a huge campfire, beyond legal limits, and I couldn't see any of the group. On a tree, I saw something that had me initially freaked out, but I figured they were still feeling the weed and any other drugs they may have taken for this to be real and continued to play. I think we only played one more game and then retired to our tents. At some point in the middle of the night, all of the adult leaders woke us up and told us to quickly and quietly pack up our things, take down our tents, and get back to the bus. As we were packing everything up, we couldn't help but notice the bonfire was still going strong, but the music had stopped and we heard people talking. The tone didn't sound like casual conversation either, but I couldn't hear specific words. I don't know how to describe it. Once everyone and everything was on the bus, the driver got us the hell out of there. The adults were abnormally quiet, and the scouts congregated at the back of the bus. I don't remember if one of the adults told us about those guys, but we knew it had to have been regarding that strange group. A fellow scout from the other CTF team had also tried to sneak into their campsite, and saw the same thing I did. Ever since, I'm inclined to think what we saw was real, and a reason for us cutting the trip short. Hanging from the tree, he and I saw a decapitated dog and 2 severed human legs. I have a few updates for you. Some are already in the comments of the Reddit post of this, so you can follow the link if you want to read more into detail, but the OP did update the following. I'd spoken to my dad about his recollection of this event, since he was with me. He thought this was 2004, but I'm pretty confident this was before I turned 14. According to him, by the time we scouts were in our tents, the adults were up a bit later than usual so they could keep an eye on the freaky group. One of them apparently did call the police about these guys, but it was decided best for us to get out of there as soon as possible. It's unlikely that the group was there to harm us or scare us, but when you have a bunch of kids around, you obviously don't take chances. We don't know if they ever got back with us after they showed up. Few of us had cell phones back then and the reception was likely poor. I got to bring this up to one of my old scout buddies, and he remembers one of the scout leaders talking about seeing them shooting up, while others were walking all over the campground. Drugs, questionable people dressed in black, and roaming around the campground makes a pretty valid reason to get out of there. He forgot that 2 of us had seen what we'd seen. My dad said something similar, and that they were chanting at points, and he didn't know about what I'd found. The other scout, Kyle, who saw it too, I think had a clearer view than I did. I don't talk with him anymore, but one of his friends I still chat with, and he was with us on the trip. He remembered a couple of those guys waving at us a few times. Not to necessarily creep us out based on how he described it, but just to wave, I guess. He didn't say if they waved throughout their wardrobe change. I would guess they were more social during their hippie phase. Also, some have asked if there's a chance that the dog and legs were prop. In short, yes, they could have been. But given that night's circumstances, I can't help but have suspicions. This happened a long time ago, age 5 or 6, but it comes up every once in a while at family gatherings, and though it's not as bone-chilling as some of the stories on here, I figured it would fit. For context, I have a very close extended family, as in a huge family that all lives within 30 minutes of each other. We all live in the suburbs of a large city, far enough away that it is generally considered a safe area with neighbors all knowing each other and car doors left unlocked in the driveway. When I was young, my grandma used to watch my cousin and I, same age, and she had 2 dogs. Dog 1 was Benji, a sweet, lovable dog. Dog 2 was Cheyenne. She was nice enough, but we always preferred Benji as he was nicer, more playful, and generally wanted to be around us more. We'd always play in the backyard with each other. sometimes with supervision and sometimes without. It was a fenced-in yard and, like I said, a nice area. Nothing strange at all. One day we're playing outside as per usual. Benji is inside with Grandma. Cheyenne was outside, but just laying away from us as we played with our cars or whatever we were messing with that day. We didn't notice until he started talking, but once he speaks, we notice an older man, maybe 50-something, trying to talk to us through the fence, no more than 20 feet away. He seems nice enough, but I was young, so I had no clue. We kind of walk over to him, but not very close, 6 feet from the fence. He's talking to us about God knows what. This whole time, Cheyenne had started to come over by us and was growling lowly. We didn't think much of it and kept talking. I can't remember what the subject of the conversation was. All I know is that at one point he began to try to call us over to him, to which we wouldn't. We knew that much at least. He was getting upset. At this point, he started to climb the fence. I have never been so afraid of a dog in my life. Cheyenne starts going absolutely berserk. As in, if he had gotten over the fence, I don't think Cheyenne would have let him leave the yard alive. He jumps back. My grandma hears this happening, so she rushes out to the yard and sees the guy, us, and the dog going insane. She starts screaming like I had never heard her scream before as he runs away and down the road. We ended up being rushed inside where my grandma sat us down and very nicely explained the stranger danger thing again. My grandma had no idea who it was. It was not a neighbor. The whole time the rest of the day, Cheyenne would not leave our sides. I was always a little scared of Cheyenne after that. I know now it wasn't fair to her, she was protecting us. After that, I always learned to trust my dogs. We've had dogs as long as I can remember, and I will always trust any of them over any person every time. I have no idea what he was planning on doing if he got in the yard and Cheyenne hadn't been there. When I was a sophomore in high school, I had a really popular math teacher for algebra, whom I'll refer to as Mr. Myers. He was not only a teacher, but also the coach of the school's varsity football team. Mr. Myers was a friendly and laid-back guy who was always more than happy to help others with math, even if they weren't in his class. The class I was in was slower paced, and as a result was filled with kids who for the most part didn't give a shit about anything and were just obnoxious dicks. Because of that, I was one of the few people in the class who didn't drive Mr. Myers insane, and he grew to like me. I remember one day a kid who sat next to me asked me if I did any drugs or other inappropriate shit, and Mr. Myers told him to leave me alone. Anyway, I was doing poorly in class, and Mr. Myers suggested that I see him once a week after school to get tutored. Since I didn't see any of the after-school tutors that were available, I agreed. For a few weeks, I would see him once a week on days I didn't have math to get some extra help. Mr. Myers was very supportive and encouraging during these sessions, and I did improve from visiting him. Even though I was extremely terrible at math, I did admit that he was an excellent teacher, and could really tell he wanted to make an impact on some people. I remember when I was a junior, I wanted to be a teacher's assistant for one of his classes. After what happened later, agreeing to see him for tutoring would end up being one of the most chilling decisions I ever made. Fast forward to 2017. Mr. Myers had left the school a few years before that, and at that point I had forgotten about him. When I arrived home from school one day, I checked the newspaper out of curiosity. What I saw on the front page will always chill my spine. It turns out that Mr. Myers had his teacher credentials stripped by the state because former female students of his who attended the same school as me came forward that he sexually abused them. To say that I was stunned would be an understatement. I couldn't believe that I was so close to being one of those poor souls. I'm very thankful nothing ever happened to me, but it always makes me sick knowing that a predator was roaming around the school targeting vulnerable girls like myself. Even sicker was that one of the people who had helped Jane Doe file the complaints against Mr. Myers said that the school district knew about his behavior but didn't bother to do any investigating on him. It makes me wonder if I can ever trust the district ever again. What was extremely freaky was that one of the Jane Does could have been someone I graduated with, as she was the same age as me during the time. My acquaintance was spreading around the idea that people within the class could send him school-related memories in hopes that they would be entered into the yearbook. Sadly, he said that one of the entries he received was by a sexual assault victim. I sometimes wonder if that person was the Jane Doe who could have been in my class. I'm happy to say that Mr. Myers is far, far away from me, and it's unlikely I'll ever see him again. For the record, those stories my acquaintance received never made it into the yearbook. I'm not a believer of the paranormal. Or, well, I thought I wasn't. After this situation about 2 years ago in southwestern Pennsylvania, some things are particularly difficult to dismiss as abysmal. For the most part, I've only kept this story to myself. I didn't want anyone to think I was crazy or just blatantly lying. I was riding my new motorcycle through the backwoods about 30 minutes away from where I live. A midnight black Harley for a cool midnight ride. I was taking a detour I wasn't really familiar with, so I was using a GPS mounted on my handlebars. Eventually, as much as I wish I could hold it in, I had to make a stop in the middle of the desolate dark woods and take a bio break. So I parked my bike off the side of the road at the corner and walked to the edge of the wood line. However, when doing so, I heard something that I still hear to this day. A long and drawn-out female screaming from within the forest behind me, past the opposite side of the road. I quickly fixed my attire and spun around, fully expecting to see someone only feet away with how proximal the scream was. Even beneath my armored riding jacket, I could feel my goosebumps develop and hair stand straight. Nothing but silence as cold as the forest depths had followed. Nothing was making any sounds. There were no crickets, no birds, no owls, just pure isolation. After what seemed like an eternity, I was starting to doubt my own conscience, thinking I wasn't even hearing anything to begin with. Whenever I sat back down on my motorcycle, I wanted to just speed away and leave whatever that sound was behind, imagination or not. As soon as I went to hit the ignition, this time the scream was unmistakable. It was definitely someone screaming in the woods bloody murder. Most normal people, even sane people, would have instantly taken off. However, something inside of me was triggered by the event. After all, I was a fireman and a soldier who was on leave. I felt it was somewhat my duty to at least make a vague attempt to discover the source. Fighting my urges to flee, I grabbed my cell phone and left towards the woods. There was a large amount of brush mixed with the foliage that made traversing the cold, muddy, steep hillside almost impossible. If it wasn't for my riding boots and digging my gloves into the dirt, I doubt I even would have made it up the hill. "Hello? I'm here to help. I'm a fireman," I yelled out into the forest while making my way up the hillside. Nothing. No response. Once all the way up the path, I found a slightly trotted path that leads to a tunnel I never even knew had existed. Once I approached the tunnel entrance, I used my light from my cell phone to illuminate the area. Surprisingly, railroad tracks that seemed to rise out of the dirt ran along the inside. It must have been an old railway tunnel I never even knew had existed in the first place. I don't know why. Hell, I don't even think it's reasonable. But curiosity took hold and I made my way into the tunnel. It was so dark my cell phone's flashlight couldn't even illuminate more than 20 feet in front of me. My boots were splashing along in the tunnel, occasional damp areas every 50 yards inside. This is where things became, well, twisted. Eventually, I started noticing foreign splashing sounds. I thought maybe at first it was my echo, so I stopped dead in my tracks. I listened. I listened and listened and listened until finally, wet footsteps could be heard. It almost sounded like wet feet being slapped against something. The sound was coming from ahead of me, still slightly distant. Even aiming my light directly down the tracks, I couldn't see anything. With the air growing even colder than it already was around me, my breath was shaking while I listened. In a few brief moments, my cell phone light suddenly began to fail and go out. As soon as I heard the footsteps becoming a bull rush towards me, I let out a surprised yell that can only be described as a grunt and dashed back towards the entrance of the tunnel. I didn't look back and sprinted as fast as I could, still hearing those wet footsteps trailing me closer and closer. I didn't even stop when I hit the entrance. I slid down the hillside on the side of my legs and hip to get to the bottom. I was moving non-stop as quickly as I thought possible. Even as big of a run for my life I was in, I stopped cold in my tracks as soon as I arrived at the road. My bike was gone. Or at least it was moved about 30 yards down the road from the corner I parked it at. There was no way someone could have moved it. Even the keys were still in the ignition since I forgot about them. If someone moved it, not only did they not start it, but they could have easily stolen it as well. Here is the part I will never forget. From where my bike was originally to where it had moved were fresh, wet footprints on the road. Not boot prints or shoe prints, but bare feet marks. I couldn't even comprehend the situation and didn't even remotely attempt to understand it. I dashed for my bike, hopped on, and practically started it as soon as my bottom touched the seat and then took off. As I made my way through the sharp twists and bends of the back road, I felt something heavy on the passenger seat of my bike, as if something was sitting right behind me. A cold, wet hand could be felt tightly gripping around my armored shoulder from my jacket. I could even feel long nails. I didn't look back. I couldn't look back. There was zero chance I was going to take my eyes off the road from how fast I was racing down it. As soon as I cleared the woods, all of that foreign weight seemed to be lifted from my bike, and even that grip left my shoulder. That was a detour to a bar I'm never going to take again. Ever. Or so my dumb self thought. After telling one of my closest friends about the story, he immediately wanted to go see this supposed tunnel as soon as possible. For a while I declined until I finally gave in. It had to wait until my next leave from the army. So, 6 months later when my leave came back, we made our way to the same exact location, but this time during the day. We parked our motorcycles and made our way up the hillside. Here is where things get weird. The path seemed to curve directly away from where the tunnel was, only being a grassy hillside there. It was gone. I knew for a fact that this was the exact point where it was before. My friend and I searched probably a 400 square yard area for this entrance. Nothing. We checked the local geographical maps. Nothing. We checked the railroad indexes. Nothing. We checked the tunnel indexes. Nothing. There was zero evidence this place even existed to begin with. The closest thing nearby was a long abandoned bridge. So, a few days later, I asked one of my friends from a fire department near there about that bridge. He told me a story where a couple was riding a dirt bike across that bridge, but somehow they ended up wrecking into the side of it, sending the passenger who sat directly behind the rider over the bridge's edge and falling to her death in the water below. He asked why I wanted to know, but I just told him I was curious about it since I saw it one day. I knew I couldn't tell him of that story. To this day, I still feel like a bit of a coward. I fled for my life whenever I originally thought someone else's was in jeopardy. I never found out if anyone really had gone missing there, or worse. It remains a mystery to me this very day. That cold, wet hand gripping my shoulder when I rode off, those wet footsteps chasing me, the wet footprints guiding directly from point A to point B from where my bike was, the screams. Nothing added up to me, and I've yet to figure any of these things out. I love the great outdoors. You wouldn't catch me outside in the dead of night, but I am practically a forest ranger in the daytime. I was even more adventurous in my youth, and my sister and I would often be allowed to traverse the woods and the lands my parents and uncles owned. In retrospect, this is surprising given all of the strange and scary stories we were told about odd sightings in those woods. This story adds to that list. I was a strange kid, for various reasons, but I won't get into that in this story. The elderly in my community would say that children, like animals, are sensitive to energies around them, so they often pick up on things that others cannot. In my case, I was drawn to our family graveyard. I do not know why, other than the fact that it was basically an energetic playground. Like a patchwork quilt, the large spaces had some areas feeling energetically invigorating, places that feel comfortable, and areas that feel not so safe. If I ever felt the desire to go to the places that had the vibes I was slightly unsure about, I would try to convince my father or sister to come with me. Yeah, I guess you could say that sometimes I like to dance with the devil. Quite literally so in some of my experiences. Anyway, one particularly lazy summer afternoon, my dad's sister and I walked to the family graveyard to study the tombstones. I wanted to venture down an overgrown, forgotten trail located in the forestry behind the graveyard, a place that we were all uneasy about. This day, the energy there towards the back of the graveyard didn't feel so heavy, and with great luck I had convinced both my father and my sister to accompany me. They gave a light-hearted sigh of frustration as they followed me to the edge of the graveyard. Once I reached the entrance of the trail, I stopped in my tracks. It felt like a thick wall of energy stood before me, repelling me from going any further. I was intimidated, but determined to commit to my adventure. So I waited for my family to catch up and let my father lead the way. We honestly didn't get far. Probably 3 or 4 meters before, in a clear patch of grass to our right, we happened upon a strange and unsettling sight. There, lying sprawled out on an old tire, was some peculiar animal. It looked like a large version of those novelty primates with long legs and arms with Velcro attached to its hands. People would often hang them from their rearview mirrors in the dash of their cars. Except this thing was not a toy, and it was clearly dead. Its fur was white as snow and was scattered everywhere as if it was strangled to death. Out of petrified curiosity, I took one step forward to get a closer look at its face, but all I could see was its snapped neck. Its head must have been lying limp behind the tire. My father did not let us stay any longer to investigate. We heard a shrill cry down the trail, further into the woods, and my father quickly ushered us out of there, and we briskly made our way home. We tried explaining what we saw to my aunts and uncles, but just like many of our creepy tales, they dismissed our sightings as nothing more than an illusion or an overactive imagination. You'd think differently of an extended family whose backyard belongs to Bigfoot. But what did I know? I was just a kid. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe, and share it with your friends. And if you would like to help support the channel, make sure you check out the Patron link in the description below. But if you do become a patron, make sure you wait till like the 1st. because it's going to charge you as soon as you sign up, and it will charge you again on the 1st. So if you're doing it at the end of a month, you're going to get double charged, which I wish it didn't do. So the best I can do is try to give everyone a heads up. But you can get some cool perks over in Patron, so we'd love to have you over there, including an exclusive Discord and exclusive streams. Regardless, make sure if you don't want to get double charged, you wait till the 1st. I appreciate you checking out this video, and I will catch you in the next one. And just remember to watch your back, because you never know who or what is watching. Bad bye.